Modernity start with Machiavelli, not with Descartes. Those people are derivative from Machiavelli. Machiavelli had two criticisms of Christianity. The first is that it's too cruel, and the second is that it's too weak. The prince becomes both conqueror, like Caesar, and prophet, like Christ.
Machiavelli is the father of modern science.
Machiavelli had a high opinion of Muhammad. Islam, the Turks, they were stronger than Christians in his time.
The woman is almost like the prophet, where they conquer you unarmed. And that's also the power of Christ, is that he conquers the world unarmed.
You were very good, I must say. Perhaps the most challenging questioner I've had in an interview of this kind.
We underestimate just how important Machiavelli is. At best, we consider Machiavelli to be just a clever political commentator, and at worst, we consider him to be an immoral schemer that can be easily dismissed. My guest, Harvard's Harvey Mansfield, has spent his entire career trying to show that Machiavelli is so much more, that he is the very founder of modernity, in fact, responsible for establishing the very world you and I live in. Machiavelli, according to Mansfield, is not just the founder of modern ethics and politics, but the true father of modern science itself. In Mansfield's estimation, Machiavelli's chief rivals are no less than Plato and Jesus. Machiavelli is the Antichrist, and we are his heirs. Machiavelli started a silent revolution, one that was purposefully hidden. In the next 2 hours, then, Professor Mansfield will reveal to us all its secrets. I want to spend this interview understanding what it means for Machiavelli to be a founder of modernity. But before we talk about what he founded, let's talk about what he was against, beginning with Christianity. In your books, you called Christianity Machiavelli's chief enemy. Why is that?
Christianity tries to make you better than you can be. Christianity tells you that your honor, this is the way Machiavelli would say it, lies in the next world, in heaven, as opposed to this world. And what Machiavelli tried to do was to create what we normally today call the world out of this world. The world has no reference to another world. That's modernity. And I think that's what Machiavelli got it started. If you go to Europe now, you look around and you see so many churches and so many cathedrals with very few in it. Imagine yourself entering full churches, full cathedrals. That would give you a little sense of the power of the church in Machiavelli's time. So it was his chief enemy, though perhaps the classical tradition standing behind Christianity was the predecessor, yes, and also the source of the power of the chief enemy.
I see. So let me give you a quote from the Discourses. Although the world appears to be made effeminate and heaven disarmed, it arises without doubt more from the cowardice of the men who have interpreted our religion according to idleness and not according to virtue. For if they considered how it permits us the exaltation and defense of the fatherland, they would see that it, Christianity, wishes us to love and honor it and to prepare ourselves to be such that we can defend it. These educations and false interpretations thus bring it about that not as many republics are seen in the world as we see in antiquity, nor as a consequence is as much love of freedom seen in peoples as was then. This quote, at least, makes it sound like Christianity itself is not the enemy, but only the bastardized interpretation of the time. But your reading is that the Christianity itself is the main issue.
Yes, the interpretation that Christianity makes is the interpretation, you could say, of the classical tradition. It changes it, makes it more effectual, points it in your direction. Plato spoke of the idea of the good. Machiavelli says Christianity changed the idea of the good into the idea of God. God is a personification of good. God is how most ordinary people understand good. If you say something is good, people immediately want to know, how do I get it? They don't want to know so much, what is it? That's what the philosopher wants to know. But Machiavelli says God is the person who will get it for you. He's the personification of the good. So that is a way in which Christianity itself is an interpretation of the good. And so, in general, one can say that Christianity's interpretations come about from itself. It interprets itself.
Might there not be a more this-worldly, vigorous, and even militaristic form of Christianity, whether it's the Christianity of Constantine, the Christianity of the Crusades, or the later conquistadors, that Machiavelli could be a fan of?
Yes, there is for sure. Machiavelli had two criticisms of Christianity. The first is that it's too cruel, and the second is that it's too weak. So it is cruel to human beings because it asks them to do more than they can do, more than they have the natural power to do. But it's too weak because it can't quite put this across to nations. The church itself is militant, but not military. It can get you to believe in the things that you ought to believe, according to it, but it can't get you to move in that direction. So it doesn't have soldiers of this world. It has soldiers or priests of the next world. Therefore, it has to depend on armies in this world, and that makes it weak. So it's strong enough to prevent Italy from uniting, but not strong enough to unite it itself.
Right.
So it is the cause of the disunion of Italy. And by the way, when Machiavelli says Italy, he sometimes means the world, all countries. Italy stands for the world.
So if Christianity, in its core, was more like Islam, where it's more inherently militaristic, Machiavelli would have...
It's militant, I would say, rather than militaristic. Because Christ conquered through the word, not through arms. And the church doesn't carry arms. So that distinguishes Christianity from Islam. Muhammad was a conqueror as well as a prophet.
Right. And he would be more in favor of the conqueror plus prophet combination, it sounds like, because it's cruel still, but it's no longer weak in the way you describe Christianity to be.
That's right, yeah. So the prince needs to be a prophet as well. The normal, non-philosophic prince, somebody like Trump or even Biden, is not a prophet. He confronts the world as it is, and it is as it is because it believes what it believes. So in order really to conquer the world, he has to make it over so that it will obey him. And that means that he needs to be a prophet, a rival to Christ himself, who won the world through prophecy.
Right, I see. One of the issues that he has with Christianity is that it makes men effeminate. What is the issue he has with effeminacy?
Effeminacy just means you haven't the power to use force to get your way, and so there's something womanly about Christianity.
I see.
Women, however, are not without power, so they can attract you and use their beauty and their wiles to make you do what they want. So women have a certain place in his thinking.
Right. In some sense, if we go back to what you said about the conqueror versus the prophet, the woman is almost like the prophet, where they conquer you unarmed, so to speak.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And and that's also the power of Christ, is that he conquers the world unarmed.
He attracts you.
Right.
He attracts you with promises.
I see.
But part of the attraction is to God, who is also the Father, and therefore jealous and strong in that way. Yeah, he does use the Christian Trinity, reinterpreted to show that there's a strong side and an attractive side to his prophesizing, as well as to Christianity's.
So just to be clear here, Machiavelli would be content, not like the modern project that wants to rid itself of religion completely. You think he would be content if he was able to reform Christianity to become more this worldly?
Yes, that's one possibility. I don't know which attracted him more, the idea of simple atheism with no religion at all. That might be for people like him, but for most people are too weak for that. And the weak need religion. They somehow sense that they are weak, and they need the strength of some higher power. So they call upon this higher power and get them to do things.
When you described his issues with Christianity, but also how he thought Christianity conquered Rome, that Rome became too big and decadent, that there was always this slave morality, essentially, it reminds me a lot of Nietzsche and Genealogy of Morality. How do you think these two anti-Christian authors, how is their relationship with Christianity different?
Good question. In Nietzsche, I think there is a stronger rejection of the weakness, of the softness of Christianity. He associates Christianity with democracy. With Machiavelli, there's a greater interest in how Christianity won the world. So I would say he's more impressed with the strength of Christianity,
right,
the strength of the weak. That's also a theme in Nietzsche, you could say, yes, the ascetic ideal. Strength used to make yourself weak, strength used against itself, against yourself. I don't think Machiavelli is attracted by that sort of asceticism. I believe he's more rational, that prudence tells you to make use of this Christian weakness. And you don't need to have your mind conquered by an internal version of religion, that is, which turns out to be the will to power. So that's, I don't know, I think you could find the idea of slave morality in Machiavelli as well as in Nietzsche. The two are similar in an interesting way. You're right.
Right, I see. You mentioned how even though Christianity is the chief enemy, the prior enemy is the classical tradition. It's very interesting then that in the beginning of the discourses, Machiavelli seems to want to rescue the classical tradition, the prior enemy, in order to tame the chief enemy, right? So there's a deeper admiration of the classical tradition from Machiavelli. Tell us about that.
Yes. Right at the beginning of the discourses, Machiavelli discusses what made Rome strong and free. And it was not the harmony of the Roman Republic, but the disharmony, the conflicts between the nobles and the plebs. What makes you stronger is having a strong enemy to oppose, rather than to have somebody who agrees with you. The strength of Rome came from its dislike, its internal dislike, and this is what impressed, or what he wants to impress you with when he begins. So he wants to make Rome strong, and only gradually does he begin to introduce the idea of Rome's weakness. Mm. Rome's weakness was that it gave in to Christianity. It wasn't strong enough to defeat the weak. So when Machiavelli looks at things, most generally, he thinks that the ancients were strong and the moderns were weak. But somehow the strong ancients, Rome lost out to the weaker Christians. So you have to see and understand how that happened. And that's what he does. The disagreement among the Romans gave rise to the possibility that some figure could appeal to the plebs, to the people, as against the nobles or the Senate, which was the chief motivating force of the Roman Republic. So a man who could imitate Caesar, but defeat Caesar, because Caesar couldn't rule the world above, the next world, could spread this word to a universe of plebeians, enabling them to believe their way into power, you might say.
I see. And so what he wants to rescue from the classical tradition, it sounds like, is certainly not the philosophers, right? It's certainly not Plato, Aristotle, the idea of the good, the forms, or this other realm. It's more like classical political action, like the actual lives of a Caesar or the great consuls before him. Is that fair? It's the actions rather than the ideas that are to be rescued from classical antiquity.
Yes, and therefore the idea of the prince, as opposed to the Republican idea of the many, that the people who are weak could find greater strength in one person than in the few aristocrats or nobles who appeal to their courage. Better to appeal to their sense of their weakness and to make them look for a higher power than human power, and to find honor in obeying and worshiping that higher power. Yeah, the prince becomes both conqueror like Caesar and prophet like Christ, the two brought together.
Right. Which again makes me think that Muhammad is almost like the ideal archetype in some sense, right? Both prophet and conqueror.
Yes, Machiavelli had a high opinion of Muhammad.
He did.
And Islam, the Turks, they were stronger than the Christians in his time and posed a threat to the West.
I see. What is the issue that Machiavelli has with the gentlemanly, the aristocratic, and the noble class?
In the first place, he looks into their real motivation, which is their own power. The few are the ministers of the few, he likes to say. They're interested in their power and in their wealth, and not at all interested in the well-being of the people. They get in the way of the prince. They are rivals to the prince. That's, in a way, a good thing, because a republic is based on a rivalry among the few. But a republic gives the power of a prince, especially the Roman Republic, to one person for a time, and then it opens up the field to rivals to supplant that person. So you get a constant supply of fresh energy. That's what a republic does. Whereas a principality consists of a republic where one prince has succeeded in doing away with his rivals, his barons. So those barons compete with one another, And the prince wants to overcome that competition. He wants to become uno solo, one alone, as the aim of the prince, and the aim that you could say the human goal itself, to be alone. And, and to do this, he uses the people as his ally. And so that Machiavelli's political science anticipates the history of, say, modern politics, which consists in the growth of a monarchy based on an alliance with the people against the nobles.
Right. So one issue you pointed out of the nobles is that they care for their own interests and not of the country at large, the common good. But the prince is also after his own interests in that he's chasing glory, and it's only an unintended consequence, or maybe intended consequence, that he happens to benefit the republic, or to benefit the country. So I'm not seeing a difference there. Could you really draw out, like, what is the issue? Is it because the nobles are a stagnant force that don't allow any innovation, or yeah, tell me about that.
They divide the power of the country. They divide the prince's power. They try to make provincial duchies or provinces, as in France, and prevent a unification of the whole. And they attract vassals and people who depend on them.
But isn't that a good thing, to further separate and splinter a country so that there's more rivalry, from Machiavelli's view?
The rivalry is good, but the result of rivalry, which is one alone, is even better. So the rivalry is the way to the prince. And both of them show that what human beings want is to be on top. And I think that's the most general truth. Later on, this was called the state of nature, later on in modern political science.
Right. And uno solo role is not only good for the individual, being his deepest desire, it's also good for the state, because he can act as an executive very effectively. He can do extraordinary actions. That's the idea. Whereas if you just have a stalemate between rival houses, kind of nothing gets done and you just get weakened.
Yes, that's a stalemate. If they get together in the Senate, then it can work. But that getting together in the Roman Republic was a coming apart, and the destruction of the Republic, and the rivalries, the parties in the late Republic. So it's things move, according to Machiavelli. Yeah, politics is not stability. Yeah. In order to be stable, you have to move ahead. You have to keep on acquiring.
Right, I see. And a country splintered by the aristocracy or oligarchs doesn't have the same kind of ability to move ahead as a uno solo dictator prince at the helm.
No, and unless one of the dukes becomes the king.
I see.
But there's always the movement is toward greater acquisition.
I see. So we talked about what he was against, the classical and the Christian tradition. And now I want to introduce this idea of necessity, because both the classical and the Christian tradition are professions of goodness, of morality, of the good life. And Machiavelli replaces that with the profession of necessity. So tell us about that idea.
Yes, for people who want to be good. You have to profess it because you have to explain it to yourself. Mm. If you're good, how are you going to prevent other people who are not good from taking advantage of you? So if you're good, well, you come to ruin among so many who are not good. So you need to work out some explanation why these people who are not good won't be able to take advantage of you. And that is a version or a vision of a good society, a good politics, whereby doing good will result in your receiving good. People will be grateful. And this requires reference to a higher power. So it leads to the notion of religion, and especially the Christian religion, that will relieve you of your sins and remind you of the power of God and of God's providence. So that's a profession of good. And Machiavelli wants to replace this by a profession or a reference to necessity as the basis of human action. People are good only when they are required to be. So that's an obvious truth that one sees every day. People have their necessities, things which they require. And how are they going to get them? Only if they can make other people respect their necessity. So if you're a prince, you need to have obedient people in your country. And you get them by showing them that you are necessary to them. And that means that you have to teach them of the power of necessity. Necessity is stronger than goodness, or necessity is the same thing as goodness. To be good is to be necessary to yourself. And people have their own personal necessity. Someone who's weak has the necessity to believe in a profession of good.
Right, wishful thinking.
Yeah, wishful thinking. And religious thinking. So in this way, you probably cannot construct an atheist society. To get people to follow you, you need to make them think that you are so strong, that they so weak that they have no alternative at first. It looks to be a simplification of good, because who knows what good is? And there are many different kinds of good. But necessity seems to be just one thing. Necessity here and now, urgent. It's what forces you to move rather than sit. And yet, you have to think ahead. When you think ahead, you anticipate your necessity. To anticipate a necessity is not quite to feel it in the same way as being moved by it urgently. So there's long-run necessities. You have to think. That's what prudence addresses. Versus short-run necessities. That's when you react. Immediate fear. Someone points a gun at you. And that creates a situation you have to respect. But it isn't enough. No, you can't hold a gun permanently.
I want to elaborate on the last point about anticipation, because when I first read necessity, I thought, just make sure I can survive today, no one's pointing a gun to my head. But it turns out necessity is all-encompassing. Okay, so let me read to you your book, Machiavelli's Virtue. Aristotle says that to practice the virtues, one must have a certain surplus of property so that one's necessities are not always foremost in one's mind, but the acquisitions of property must be limited by the requirements of virtue, both in manner and amount. Aristotle says this. Machiavelli, however, allows that tendency of acquisition to go as far as it can. One can never know how much equipment one may need. What primitive men must do to scratch an existence from nature, civilized men must do to keep ahead of their rivals. Necessity means the necessity to acquire, so men cognizant of necessity must devote themselves to acquisition. The temporal scale, right? The fact that there's future necessity and the fact that there's competition means that it's all necessity, all the way down. Is that a fair interpretation?
That is, I think. That think of billionaires today. Those people have much more than they need. Billionaires want to become the highest, most powerful billionaire. That's the honor they point toward. So they don't stop acquiring. You would think that that they've well passed the natural limit of acquisition. All your needs are satisfied. But no, the greatest need you have is to acquire more and more, which is more and more honor or more and more glory.
I see. So the necessity encompasses not just the survival of the body or physical safety, like Hobbes, but also societal standing.
Yes. People often use the term survival. Science uses it. Darwinian evolutionary science uses the word survival as if that was a limit. But for most people, they have really an Aristotelian, or you could say a classical sense of survival. They mean really not just survival plain, but survival as they are. So that there is a kind of formal aspect to survival. And that's a limited survival as opposed to an unlimited survival based on acquisition. So acquisition does go beyond survival to glory, to the point that for Machiavelli, glory is just part of necessity. There are some people who aren't satisfied with what satisfies most people, and those people pursue glory.
I see. When I hear this almost recommendation for infinite acquisition, right? I think about the edge, like the counterexamples. I tend to think about my grandma, who was born before the Chinese Civil War, and because she was thinking about necessity the whole time, she was one of 2 children out of a litter of 10 that survived, lived through the Cultural Revolution. She's still in necessity mode. When we go to McDonald's together, she still collects ketchup packets, okay? But she of course, has gathered her entire life.
Yeah.
She's quite well off now.
Yes.
But if you look at that, to me, that's quite a good counterexample to what Machiavelli is saying. And maybe the billionaire case would arouse similar suspicions, which is, surely now's the time for you to actually live not just a necessary life, but a good life. What would Machiavelli say to that?
Yeah, she's looking forward to future need of ketchup.
Exactly, right.
Your grandma. That's a little bit of the spirit of the prince.
Right.
That, I think, is how he would interpret it.
But that is meant to be a critique, right? I'm pulling that up as meant to be.
It's meant to say that a certain thrift is all you need. And maybe at a certain point in one's life, one looks down on such small acquisitions as extra packets of ketchup. But that's still a little bit of the princely spirit.
I see,
I think that Machiavelli might appreciate.
So does he have a conception of what a good life is, other than just getting as much material resources and glory as humanly possible? Yeah.
I don't think that there is anything higher than the highest glory. And that there is a conception of the good life. There's the good life is the acquisitive life, carried on as far as it can go to the point where you are uno solo. Uno solo is the good life, and yet it's a life of continuing acquisition. Right. That word acquisition, by the way, is interesting. It's a word which Machiavelli uses in the sense of conquer, acquistare. He uses this economic term to acquire goods, acquisitive, to mean something political and military. So it's, you could say it's a kind of already there in that word, an overcoming of the distinction between what you need and what you want to acquire.
I see.
Is an economic term, satisfies both politics and military.
However, it sounds like there's actually two things that make up necessity. One is bodily necessity, like mere survival. And that's what I thought about necessity. That's what most people think about necessity when they first hear it. But there also seems to be a necessary desire, at least in some people, to get as much glory as humanly possible. And that's the second set of goods that constitute the good life for Machiavelli. But these two, of course, are in conflict, right? Martyrs, for example, give up the former and they receive the latter. University professors, compared to billionaires, might not have material wealth, but have surplus, some of them at least, of glory and recognition. Does Machiavelli think about which is primary of these two?
Which is primary is the glory that he has of being a philosopher.
Right. The glory, not the material, but the...
That's right.
Right.
The understanding. But the understanding leads him to appreciate the material and to appreciate the need for action as opposed to contemplation. His contemplation tells him that contemplation is insufficient or not powerful enough in a human mind. You always want to make the result of your thinking or contemplating more powerful, make you more powerful than otherwise. So he's, unlike Plato's philosopher, doesn't want to rule. That's in Plato's Republic.
To be dragged down sometimes.
Yes, yeah, that's a bother. It's something you don't like. Or Machiavelli's philosopher finds it necessary to rule.
But hold on. But if of the two goods, right, material good and recognitive good,
yes,
if recognition is the superior good, as you're describing it is, then who has more glory nowadays? Is it Plato or is it Pericles? It's Plato, right? And so in that world, suddenly being this absentee, like otherworldly philosopher seems like the superior strategy.
No, that's the same thing as in Machiavelli, that the glory of the philosopher, even though it ends in the glory of the prince, is nonetheless higher and more powerful. He's still in charge of us. As the creator of the modern world, he's there. He's still the prince.
Right.
Whether we recognize him or not is less important. In fact, it's necessary to our way of thinking, to our acquiring, that we not recognize how powerful Machiavelli is over us.
Right.
So Machiavelli creates a kind of oblivion following him. He makes people less concerned with the power of philosophy because philosophy tells them that power is all they should have. So, and yet the difference between the power of the philosopher and of the non-philosopher remains. There's a great difference between Machiavelli himself and the princes that he advises. He speaks in The Prince of the problem of a minister who is more intelligent than the prince he advises. And that's he himself. He's more intelligent than we are.
Right.
But and so he has greater glory. But he allows us to seek glory for ourselves, understanding therefore that princely glory is higher than a mere professor, even a professor of necessity like Machiavelli. So,
but that's the fraudulent part, because it's actually the professorial glory that's higher, but he tricks us into thinking the princely glory is higher.
We can't serve him if it's obvious that we serve him. So he gives you a way of thinking which tells you that philosophy is less powerful than princeliness,
I see.
that people who acquire in political life, or today billionaires, are stronger, more acquisitive, more glorious than the people who show them that this is necessary to themselves.
Right. So just so I get this straight, his actual view is that at the end of the day, the good life bottoms out to glory. And whether you get that, if you're Jesus and you don't own anything, if you're Plato and you're an aristocrat, but you're not in this acquisition mode, or you're a billionaire, it's just about the glory. Now, given that, the philosopher's glory and the prophet's glory is clearly extends further in time than the billionaire's glory or the prince's glory. But he's tricking the billionaires and the princes into thinking that their glory is actually greater. So if one is a true reader of Machiavelli, one can see that material necessity, material acquisition is actually secondary to glory. And therefore, the true reader of Machiavelli should probably imitate Machiavelli and start a new religion, then follow his guidance and start acquiring material. Is that fair?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Machiavelli is different from Machiavellian. We use the word Machiavellian as a pejorative remark. Well, that's Machiavellian. I think he knew that he would be understood in this way.
Right.
That people retain a notion of the good and distinguish it from what he thinks and calls what he thinks by a name that they mean to convey ill or evil. So, but it doesn't bother him because he knows we are weaker. So therefore, that's why we need the good. It's our necessity.
Right.
And a good deal of this weakness extends to people who don't think they are weak or are not normally considered weak, like politicians and statesmen and others.
What do you think about this claim that glory and being first amongst men, uno solo, is the end-all, be-all of good life? That seems like a very childish right view of. I mean, one can think of many tyrants who are like uno solo, who it's obvious to me that I wouldn't want to switch lives with him. On the converse, there are many people who are not like that, who I think live great lives. And do you think that's a plausible claim?
You could say it's refuted by Machiavelli himself, who in his famous letter describes how he reads the ancient authors.
I actually prepared that. May I read it for our audience now?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's lovely. When evening has come, I return to my house and go into my study. At the door, I take off my clothes of the day, covered with mud and mire, and I put on my regal and courtly garments, and decently reclothed, I enter the ancient courts of ancient men, where received by them lovingly, I feed on the food that alone is mine and that I was born for. There I am not ashamed to speak with them and to ask them the reason for their actions, and they in their humanity reply to me. And for the space of 4 hours, I feel no boredom, I forget every pain, I do not fear poverty, death does not frighten me. So everything acquisition out the door, I deliver myself entirely to them.
Yeah.
So this is refuted, right? By his own life, that there is a contemplative life beyond glory and.
But he also says the food that is mine alone. And there's the solo again.
Even in contemplation, he is the uno solo.
Yes, maybe it's sufficient to be alone together with Plato and Aristotle, and especially Xenophon, Machiavelli's favorite classical thinker.
So
you're right, there is some kind of contradiction there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end, he comes to the good.
Yeah.
It's good to follow necessity. Doesn't that mean it's good to follow good?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, which is the way he justifies necessity is things like, well, necessity leads to effeminate men lead to ruin and chaos. But there, he's also giving a new standard of good, right? Namely that ruin and chaos are not good, and therefore stability is good. So it seems like he still needs, at the very least, a new standard of good to justify why necessity should supplant goodness, right?
Yes, and but isn't that necessary to his necessity?
Right.
One can play necessary and good back and forth. It's like tennis.
Right.
I see all these different issues, I think, and no, at the end, I'm not a Machiavellian.
Right. I see. There seems to be another potential issue with acquisition. So let me read you a quote from the Discourses. This is him teaching us how to build lasting republics. To settle it in a strong place of such power that nobody would believe he could crush it at once. On the other hand, it would not be so great as to be formidable to its neighbors, and so it could enjoy its state at length. For war is made on a republic for two causes. One, to become master of it, the other, for fear lest it seize you. The issue here that this quote provides with this acquisition mode we've been talking about is that sometimes acquisition can invite ruin. And to use the billionaire example, maybe if you're starting to be a trillionaire, the SEC is going to start investigating you. And the press is going to start going after you. Now, if you're just a single-digit, low deca-billionaire, that's totally fine. So acquisition seems to go against your own interest, even on Machiavelli's standard of your own survival.
That looks forward to, you might say, the degeneration of Machiavelli's notion of acquisition into Adam Smith's notion of self-interest.
Tell us more.
That it's in your interest not to be acquisitive to the point that you acquire enemies. I think Machiavelli would say that's an illusion, or a delusion. Your self-interest will not lead you to be peaceable, as later economists or economical people want to think. It implies a kind of small or limited mind, that you see your self-interest in satisfaction rather than in honor. Self-interest is meant to be a substitute for honor, but it can't. I think Machiavelli has a better understanding of honor than do the liberal philosophers who followed him. Those liberal philosophers, like Hobbes and Locke and Adam Smith and Hume, were afraid of the evil-doing that Machiavelli endorsed. They thought that would lead to too much violence and war and suffering. So they tried to reintroduce a kind of morality that would limit acquisition.
Right. But it's still in the Machiavellian frame. It's still individualistic, acquisitive material.
It is. They are Machiavellians, and they thought to correct him, and one wonders whether they did so successfully.
So how is Machiavelli's acquisitive drive different from the bourgeois acquisitive drive?
Machiavelli's is political. It's the acquisition of power over human beings, especially other human beings. The bourgeois wants more wealth,
right,
and the recognition that goes with wealth. So the desire for wealth is meant to be a limit on the desire for political power. If you live under capitalism, which honors wealth, that will induce a number of power-seeking individuals to become wealthy instead of become princely. And this will calm down the politics of Machiavellianism
Right.
and make the turbulent souls, to use Locke's phrase, industrious and rational.
Right. So the liberal philosopher's hopes is that if we turn acquisition away from politics, which is more zero-sum,
Yeah,
and direct it to economics, which can be positive-sum,
yeah,
that would lessen the hostilities among men.
that's right.
But in a way that Machiavelli wouldn't have liked, right? Because Machiavelli wants the hostility to exist for virtue, right?
Right, that's right.
I see.
Yes, so capitalism costs Machiavelli's virtue,
Right.
its attraction.
We talked about how the Machiavellian individual is after acquisition of political power, material, and the material resources that feed into that, ultimately for the service of glory. Does he care about anyone outside of himself? Or are all the seemingly altruistic actions he does actually a consequence of the glory?
Maybe glory needs relaxation occasionally. Maybe gravity needs levity. Maybe male human beings need females. So it's not so much an attraction as a recreation, I'm guessing. Acquisition takes over from Eros. And I think in Machiavelli, you see that in his comedy Mandragola, where Eros is manipulated and made fun of, shown to be a source of weakness rather than strength.
I wonder if we're finding another contradiction between his ideas and how he actually lived life. So the first contradiction we found was regarding how he didn't claim in his theory that there was a contemplative ideals, and yet in these letters, he clearly has that kind of disposition. Here, he's claiming that altruism is just, at best, it's recreation. It's not the key part of human psychology. And yet he opens up the discourses by saying he intends it to benefit mankind. And so maybe he's a bit more public-spirited and altruistic than he himself lets on.
Yeah, altruistic as opposed to erotic. He wants to bring benefit to every individual, to each, ciascuno. That means each person,
Right.
As an individual, but which means not as a society or as a group. You don't get your pleasure from bonding with other individuals. So you could say that's an important statement of modern individualism, that each thinks of each above all,
Right.
and therefore is most attracted by a benefit to each.
Mm.
It also tells you that he's not just interested in Florentines or Italians, but in all human beings.
Right.
But the all is an all of individuals, not of association, nations, or fundamentally.
But even just the fact that he said that, I want to benefit each, I mean, that must come from some kind of, okay, it's not acquisition. It's clearly not glory, because he expects, as you said, to not be recognized. So that desire to use his writing to effect the change that will benefit each, is that a kind of altruism that he himself might not even want to admit?
Humanity.
Yeah, humanity.
The kind of humanity that he said the classical authors had when they answered his questions. The virtue of humanity consists in doing good to human beings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
By showing them that they must live according to necessity.
Right.
He wants to do us good.
Yeah. Exactly.
But that's his understanding of good, which is not good or necessity.
Let me read you one of my favorite quotes from your newest book on the effectual truth. Honor comes not from fools, but from those qualified to bestow it, who are as much impressed with noble losers as winners. Machiavelli does not write tragedies, The desire for glory is the selfish pursuit of approval from a grateful country rewarding conquest or some other difficult, risky accomplishment. It connects evil deeds done for self-aggrandizement to good results for the people. The vulgar, the people whom the prince must impress, they set the standard of success. In this sense, Machiavelli is fundamentally democratic. What I found so striking about your reading there is I studied with Axel Honneth and Fred Neuhauser, recognition theory, and one of the key lessons you learn is you want to desire the recognition of the few, of the worthy.
Yes.
Right? This is Hegel's master-slave dialectic. Why does the master not enjoy the recognition of the slave? Because he doesn't have the kind of requisite authority to recognize another master.
Mm-hmm.
Machiavelli here is suggesting the exact opposite. You don't want to be recognized by the other wise men and philosophers because they would recognize an honorable loser. You want to impress the vulgar because their standards are more this worldly and more about just material success. Is that roughly right?
Yes. Vulgar people are vulgar, so you have to be vulgar in a certain way to impress them. Vulgarity. Here's a difference between Machiavelli and Plato and Aristotle. You could say they both appeal to the senses, but to different senses. Machiavelli appeals to touch. Plato and Aristotle appeal to see. What you touch is more vulgar, more true than what you see. What you see can mislead you because you see visions. You see what the late American President George H.W. Bush called the vision thing. Beautiful phrase he had, as something which misleads most people.
Right.
But when you get close and touch, then truth comes to you. Truth is palpable, not so much visible. The vulgar know because they touch. That's in the Prince.
I see.
For Plato and Aristotle, beauty, which is visible, is a kind of distraction from what is better than visible and is invisible, the invisible good. That's, of course, especially in Plato.
So we talked about necessity and his attempt to turn the world from operating on goodness to necessity. How does virtue, the word virtue, change given that?
Well, virtue is no longer virtue of the soul. It's a kind of extension of the body, of the strength of the body, and producing energy. And energy is a quality of the soul which comes out of the body. And the same thing, Machiavelli's virtù comes out of the body, the need to acquire to satisfy the body's needs.
Right.
And it makes what is soulful or spiritual into something more vulgar, more sensational, visible in the sense of sensational, more impressive than virtue, which by itself can be quiet. Also, it unites all the 11 Aristotelian moral virtues into one virtue, not intellectual virtue as for Aristotle, but the virtue of acquisition that goes with acquisition.
Right.
And that's his virtue.
Right. But glory doesn't seem to be something of the body, but more closely to something of the soul.
And it's the glory of one's soul understood as one's own.
An embodied soul.
Yeah.
Or something. Right.
Yeah, that's right. And not just an embodied soul, but a soul which is body, which is an extension of the body, and which is not a lifting above the body.
I see. So it's not the
it's
glory of the martyr or the glory, right? It's the glory of the
glory of understanding, the understanding of the whole. Here again we approach the similarity of Machiavelli to the ancients as opposed to his departure. There is an understanding of the whole in Machiavelli. It's just that the whole is different.
Right, I see. Famously, of course, in The Prince, one point of virtue is to overcome fortune, right?
Yes.
And let me give you a quote from your book. Aristotle, this is in the Nicomachean Ethics, had been forced to admit against his wish that happiness is in need of good fortune. Virtue is the core of happiness for Aristotle, but not the whole of it. A virtuous man in misery can only keep his dignity, not be happy. Machiavelli's virtue seeks a true this-worldly ethics, not in need of a blessing. The blessing always comes from others, so depending on fortune's blessing is depending on others. I always read The Prince, especially what he says about Cesare Borgia, which is this extremely virtuous person, but undone by things that he couldn't possibly have controlled, as a concession by Machiavelli, similar to Aristotle, namely that virtue can only go so far, that it can never fully tame fortune. Is that right? Or is it, because in this quote, you seem to suggest that Machiavelli wants to go further than Aristotle to say that, no, virtue can completely overcome fortune.
Cesare Borgia is the nasty type of prince. But if you were to imagine Cesare Borgia as spiritual prince, then you would see that he fell short of what was needed because he depended on his father, Alexander VI.
I see.
One could get into the more secret parts of Machiavelli from this particular example. I think that Machiavelli uses worldly examples sometimes to illustrate unworldly examples, and that the relation between Cesare Borgia and Alexander VI could be understood as the relation between Christ and God the Father. And
namely that Christ is dependent of his power on the Father or on the other world.
And that he never thought that his father would die at the same time he was.
Got it. I see. So the claim is that virtue can overpower fortune. You just need to be virtuous enough. Is that fair?
Yes, yeah. And yet that virtue needs worldly force as well. Virtue is higher than worldly force, but it needs worldly force. This is what Christ couldn't appreciate. Right. He won his principality of Christian believers, or what St. Augustine called the city of God, through conversion and through suffering. But he couldn't command armies. In order to become powerful, he had to be adopted by Constantine. That is, he had to become official and political. But to become political necessarily divided his power from the power of Constantine.
I see.
So this led to the great Christian division between church and state that so distinguishes the Christian religion from other religions.
I see.
And these two sets of princes that need each other but don't appreciate each other and necessarily combat one another. So I think that's what he's referring to in this rather occult way when he speaks of Cesare Borgia. It's important that he says, there's no one I want to imitate more than Cesare Borgia. That puzzles scholars.
Imitatio Christi.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
I think that's an illustration of the fact that the Antichrist, which is Machiavelli, needs to imitate Christ. Machiavelli said that unarmed prophet always loses. And he refers to Savonarola as a loser, which indeed he was. But Savonarola was a loser to the Pope, who had him burned to death in front of Machiavelli in Florence. It's amazing that that Machiavelli says that almost in the presence of the unarmed prophet who did win.
Right, Christ. Yeah.
But in a way to make you think, I think, that you could be armed with the arms of heaven if you use them or can use them as worldly arms.
Part of your claim about Machiavelli being the founder of modernity is that he introduces certain notions in politics that we just take as a given. So party government, the modern executive, indirect government, primacy of foreign affairs. Tell us about the political revolution that Machiavelli is responsible for.
Machiavelli, I think, began the notion, or the fundamental notion, of executive power, which is that you can disguise your power if you present it as executing the will of someone who is above you, and therefore not yours. It's not my doing. You understand. It's Congress passed the law.
Right.
Say, God made the law.
Right.
The people voted me in. All these references to higher powers, in which you appear as a mere executive in the sense of a carrier out. But execute also has this other sense, since it sometimes happens that when you pass a law or make a decree, people don't obey when you merely say, please. You have to enforce your will. And so the executive then may need to execute people. There's this double sense of, in English and in Italian, and Machiavelli's Italian as well, of esecuzione as to carry out and also to kill. Because to carry out, it may be necessary to kill. So a sensational execution that everybody sees and is dramatic makes people walk ever so more softly and cautiously afterwards. It's an addition to your strength that you can appear to be weak. And that means that government is, when it's most effective, is not something that's direct, which is, I order you to do this, but it's indirect in that I am merely passing on somebody else's higher authority that requires you to do this. The most obvious example of it is confession in Christianity, that the priest doesn't tell you on his own authority what you should do to repent and give you a penance, but God does. He, however, has a special connection with God. He knows what God says, You are required to believe that he represents God. So that is the model that Machiavelli offers to modern constitutional government. It doesn't come from me, it comes from you, because you elected me. I merely represent you.
Right.
Representation. That comes out first in Thomas Hobbes, but it's found, the idea of it is found in Machiavelli's indirect government. This is one way in which Machiavelli differs from the classics. That for the classics, the most powerful person is the most visibly powerful person. If you want to find out what characterizes a society, you should say, take me to your leader when you arrive. Then you'll find out who's who and what's what. And Machiavelli says, no, what's hidden in government is more powerful than what is visible or obvious. So, hidden, what works behind the scenes. This leads to the notion of conspiracy. All power is conspiratorial. What is obvious to you is what has been presented to you as obvious. The hidden power is behind, and it manipulates or manages. Today we have schools of management, the Yale School of Management. That's a word from Machiavelli, maneggiare. To manage something is different from ordering something directly.
It's the true power behind the scenes.
Controlling
the visible executive.
Yes, right.
I see.
The longest chapter in both The Prince and the Discourses is the chapter on conspiracy. Chapter 9 on conspiracy, and chapter 19 of The Prince, and chapter 6 in book 3 of the Discourses. And there you get many examples of conspiracy, especially in the Discourses.
I see.
Those are beautiful examples.
This is another way in which Machiavelli is the Antichrist, imitating Christ.
Yes.
That he imitates the structure of the confession in this case, or the structure of Jesus and the Father.
Yes.
That he sees this is what you were talking about him wanting to imitate Christianity. He sees that it's so powerful because of these structures, and he's trying to transplant this into the kind of political realm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned in your book that was a change from Machiavelli was the primacy of foreign relationships, foreign policy over domestic policy. And the really interesting point you mentioned is that this is a way to talk about necessity instead of goodness. Because foreign policy is competitive. If we don't build these nukes, the Soviet Union will.
Yes.
And so it's a way to inject more necessity into political decision-making. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's right. That domestic policy is really a form of foreign policy. Because you mustn't understand your compatriots as friends fundamentally, but as possible enemies. And your relationship to your own people is a relationship of an alliance, a kind of foreign policy type of relationship, rather than domestic as we would understand it. Your fellows, and there's fellowship or sociability. So politics is more foreign than domestic. The rule for foreign policy should be the rule of domestic policy rather than the reverse.
I see.
It's a big mistake to treat other nations as if they were your friends.
It sounds like it's even a mistake to treat your own nation as your friend.
That's right.
Right. But to do that would be even worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The difference between friends and enemies is really a difference of whom you ally with. Yes. all alliances are temporary.
I
And
see.
this is true of domestic relations too, and perhaps parties,
Right.
that the party you ally with, Churchill knew this. He changed his party when it was convenient.
Right.
That was Machiavellian in him.
And the very existence of the party system is also another Machiavellian innovation, right? Because in the classical world, I believe no one considered party was faction. It
Yes.
was yeah.
All party was faction.
Right.
None of it was respectable. None of it was based on principle, as Edmund Burke argued.
Right.
So therefore, a republic had to be harmonious. It had to live by one principle. Machiavelli says that's not so. Princes and peoples have different principles. They're fundamentally different. You have to remember that always. And this means you can't harmonize them. You can fool them. Fraud is necessary. Fraud goes with conspiracy. The necessity to fraud is the necessity to conspire. You have to make people believe what isn't so.
I see. The reason that he advises for party politics must be the same reason that he wants competition between states, which is that this kind of war or vigor reminds people of necessity and therefore makes them virtuous and able to live the good life. How do you think Machiavelli would respond to modern times and, let's say, the existence of nuclear bombs, where war today could be catastrophic and life-ending? Does necessity today force us to stray away from a preference for war?
It forces us to speak that way. Whether it forces us to behave that way, we have yet to see. Although, if you look at the present conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, the Russians threaten Ukraine with nuclear weapons, but they haven't used them.
Right.
And so maybe the spread of nuclear weapons, or at least the fact that several nations have them, keeps them from being used by one.
Right.
And how long that can last, how long fortune will smile, is a definite question.
I see. Now, given when you read Machiavelli, how nasty kind of he or how real, I suppose, he makes politics seem, one impulse is to withdraw from politics. But here you argue it's impossible. So let me give you another quote from your book. Many live under the delusion, of course, that it is possible to live privately in society without involvement in politics. But they do not understand the basis of their security is the accomplishment of a prince who must always look out for himself and cannot therefore be trusted to take care of them should a conflict arise between the two goals. Relying on others is the same as relying on a profession of good, and it brings ruin. Society is radically politicized, leaving no refuge for those who would rather not be involved. The claim here is, if you try to leave society as an Epicurean would, that is a kind of political action, and you are dependent on people not interfering in your tranquil little paradise.
Yeah.
But surely there are degrees of involvement within politics, right? Like if politics really is nasty, as Machiavelli describes it to be, surely I can choose to be less involved in politics. Is that not a choice?
No.
Why not?
I think he would say no. This is Machiavelli's refutation of Epicureanism, you can say. Epicureanism says, live unnoticed. That is the way to be. And that will keep you out of trouble. A low profile. But Machiavelli says, you can't do that. People will recognize your power, your intelligence, your value, your worth. It's impossible for you to disguise it. you'll want to express it in some way which will attract attention and suspicion and fear.
Mm.
Even Jane Austen. Well, people will suspect her intelligence and love it or hate it. You take a risk when you're noticed, but it's a necessary risk. To win glory, you open yourself to critiques, and maybe there are people who prefer Dostoevsky, and don't like the quiet of Jane Austen.
Right.
And I think she recognized this, by the way, that she would be noticed. And that she had to arrange her life in a certain way, not get married. So, in keeping with this necessity.
But that is advice to a rare and talented individual. For the normal person who won't get noticed unless they make themselves noticed, surely they can choose to either go into the Trump administration or buy a farm in Nebraska and mind their own business and raise some chickens, right? Surely that's degrees of political involvement.
Yes, maybe for those who want to give up and submit themselves to fortune, have a happy marriage.
Right.
And not try for anything grander. Will fortune smile on you or not?
Right, I see. So really, his advice or his admonition against withdrawal is to the extremely talented and ambitious. If you want to satisfy this,
the extremely talented and ambitious have that love in their nature. It isn't something that they can deny or
the love of glory,
disguise.
the love to express, the love.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. That's a little more Nietzsche, that the will needs to express itself and will. If you don't have that, then you're relying on your own achievements, limited, to be successful.
Although even there's different ways to manifest that will and that talent, right? I'm thinking of Machiavelli himself, who did go into political exile and dialed down his political involvement while finding expression through writing The Prince and these other great works. Or someone like Cicero, after he lost the Civil War, he found expression of his greatness in a less political domain, right? So there seems to be a choice of dialing up the politicalness, even in his own life.
Yeah, but in both cases, Cicero and Machiavelli, it seems that the intellectual life brought more renown and more glory. Another modern example, Churchill, who wrote books, especially when he wasn't in power. But I think he preferred being in power to writing books. I'm not so sure that was the case with Machiavelli or even Cicero.
Right. But I guess the example was to show that even for extremely talented people, you can choose how your talent manifests, and there's less political things to choose, right? Is that fair?
The less political things are more political, if you understand them correctly. So you get more political power by writing or by being a philosopher than by being a prince.
I see.
Going back to our previous discussion.
Right, I see. I think we're finally ready to investigate your central claim that Machiavelli is the founder of modernity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an elaboration of what you mean by that?
The Effectual Truth. That's the title of my book, and it's also a phrase from Machiavelli's chapter 15 of The Prince. He says that you mustn't go to the imagination of a thing, but to the effectual truth of it. That's in Italian, verità effettuale. That one phrase seems to have been invented by Machiavelli. And he calls attention to his invention by using it strangely, astonishingly, just this once in all his writings. There's no source for that phrase, so scholars who love sources have tended to overlook it. I wanted to call attention to this particular phrase, that a thing is what its effect or outcome or result is. The example I like to use is love. If I say I love you, that really means I want something from you. My wife says, I'm tired of that example. But it's reminders like that which make me love her or help make me love her. But nonetheless, it's such a beautiful example. Now, how does that apply to a philosopher? Because Machiavelli invents the effectual truth. And what is the effectual truth of the inventor of effectual truth? And that would be what people take you to mean. When a professor gives a class, the effectual truth of it is what the student takes away from it. As we say, the takeaway. What is the takeaway? And that's the most essential part, not the intent. So the effectual truth of Machiavelli was a world which believes in the effectual truth. And that is a world which he took upon himself to begin, but he couldn't accomplish. It's a path that he takes a few steps on. He says he's almost finished it. That is a great exaggeration. Machiavelli loves to exaggerate. But he takes the first step, and the first step is to undermine, subvert the authority of Christianity, his chief enemy of his time. And he does that by criticizing Christianity openly, which he does in the discourses in 3 different chapters. And he doesn't just criticize the church and its corruption, which was a common theme, but he criticizes the
heart
of it, which is the principle that you find honor in salvation in the next world rather than in success in this world. So his being the only philosopher in the Renaissance to criticize Christianity goes with his being the philosopher who invented the phrase effectual truth. And later, a century later, Francis Bacon refers to this. A doctor in Italy named Nicholas Machiavelli said almost in plain words that those who believe in Christianity don't really practice or believe in what they say they believe. And that, in other words, he was undermining the authority of priests. That's what Machiavelli had said, that these people who want you to believe don't believe themselves in heaven and in God. He accused all Christian priests of being atheists, in effect. So a century later, Bacon brings in the first foundation of modern science. Modern science, one can see as a form of effectual truth. Modern science depends on causes that have effects, causes that precede effects. Aristotle had 4 causes. The efficient cause, where the cause precedes the effect, And the material cause, the matter of a thing, the formal cause, the form of it, the final cause, where it's aiming at or its purpose. So modern science uses just one of those.
The efficient cause.
Yeah, the efficient cause. Perhaps together, you could say, with the material cause. Those go together just as formal cause and final cause go together. In a way that comes out of Machiavelli's effectual truth. And it's the interpretation of the world. Machiavelli, I think, begins the world. I mentioned this before, that he doesn't speak of this world, but he says the world. The world is the world of worldly necessities. So the principle of necessity is the principle that characterizes, infuses the world. It's what makes the world worldly. What makes modern science confine itself to the world.
Right, I see.
So this is the way he's beginning to create modernity, and how a later philosopher, Bacon, realizes this and recognizes this. I think he saw very well that he was following Machiavelli's lead, even as he himself claimed to be the founder of the science of the modern world.
Right, I see.
And one can look at all the further philosophers, liberal philosophers later
Please.
on. I didn't do this in my book, but still I leave it for somebody else to do, to see how they too are Machiavellian in all these ways. Yeah, you mentioned some of the ways in which Machiavelli has inspired our politics with the executive and so on, and management, indirect government. So this is the world which Machiavelli created. It's a world of what you could also call rational control. Modernity is rational control.
Or two, right?
It's the attempt to change our way of life from a reliance on prejudice, tradition, and superstition to a reliance on reason, or in Machiavelli's more usual term, prudence. But he does say it is good to reason about everything. That shows that he's a philosopher.
Right.
But when you reason about everything according to him, you produce rational control. And the modern world following him, with the various philosophers who pretend not to interpret him, but actually follow him, they are his creation. Some of them rebel. Some of them, like Jonathan Swift, don't follow him. Some of them rebel, like Rousseau. And you could also say, like Nietzsche. To them, rational control is something dubious, or even something very bad. But that is Machiavelli's world rebelling against himself or against itself. Modernity is the rebellion of reason against rational control, one could say.
The effectual truth is not only the key to understanding Machiavelli as the founder of modernity, but also as a philosopher. Because a lot of people don't conceive of him as a philosopher, right? A political theorist, political commentator, but he's a philosopher because this is a key epistemic point he's making about the ontology of truth.
Yes.
That the validity of truth is not because it, as it was for Plato, in reference to a higher realm,
Yes.
but simply its effect. And that's what all of modern science is kind of grounded on.
Machiavelli is greatly underestimated, very greatly underestimated.
Right.
Yeah, he's much more powerful, much more of a philosopher than anybody thinks, most anybody thinks.
I see.
So philosophy departments should start with Machiavelli, not with Descartes or Hume. Those people are derivative from Machiavelli. To see that is to see what unifies modern philosophy.
Right. A key distinction we moderns make is between fact and value.
Yes.
And you even trace this into Machiavelli's distinction between deeds and professions. To tell us about how that works.
Yeah. It would be good for someone to write a history of the fact-value distinction. It's interesting because what is important at the beginning is the definition of fact, and what is important at the end is the definition of value. But fact is something that we take for granted, but that comes from Machiavelli. He is responsible for the discovery of fact. According to the Greeks, there is no word for fact. They say hoti, this thing which has comes and goes. And knowledge is not knowledge of what comes and goes, what is ephemeral. No, knowledge is knowledge of what is permanent or eternal even. That's knowledge. Whereas now we believe that knowledge is knowledge of facts, things that come and go. And this is a consequence of the effectual truth. Fact comes out of facere, just as effect does. The effectual truth could also be called the factual truth. In that sense, a fact is something which gets in the way of your will, what impresses you or stops you, makes you reconsider your desire or your movement. That's the way we use the word in fact. In fact, it's a totally different consideration from what you've said before. You're calling attention to it. Also, people speak of stubborn fact. And later on in modern philosophy, matter of fact. That's in Locke and in Hume. So a fact is this
something real, something
effectual
tangible.
Truth.
Right?
Yes, it's real, palpable, stops you, makes you reconsider.
Right. That's such an interesting distinction that when we think about truth, we think about facts.
Yes.
When we think about fact, we think about how tall is this chair? Things that we can measure, things
That's right.
that is the purview of science.
Yeah.
Whereas when the Greeks thought about truth,
Yeah.
it was not the sensible world. It was
Right.
emphatically what was above it. Right?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating in your book is you mentioned another way in which Machiavelli is the father of modern science. I'll give you a quote. Nature must be interrogated, or to speak plainly, tortured. The real facts of science, like the real truth known to a prisoner, will come out under extreme pressure that removes the subject from its deceitful comfort zone to a laboratory or a torture chamber. When we apply Machiavelli's political intuitions around examining the extreme situation, around the efficacy of torture and spectacle,
Yes.
into the natural world, that's how you use science.
Yes.
To reveal the nature secrets.
Yes. The word is experiment. And that's the word that Bacon used, that philosophy must become experimental. That is, you take a thing out of its comfortable context and place it where it's itself, by itself. The state of nature tells you what a human being is like. A vacuum tells you what gravity is like. Fact, as a result, leads from ordinary facts, common sense facts, to real facts which are experimental and therefore scientific. So science comes out of common sense fact, but it criticizes it because common sense just looks at what is ordinary. In Machiavelli, there's a distinction between ordinary and extraordinary. Extraordinary is what defines ordinary. Extraordinary is something extreme, but it's the extreme situation that defines the normal situation. Ordinary people make mistakes because they take normality for granted. This was an issue in our presidential election recently, that Biden would bring normality back to American politics after the experiment of Trump.
Right. So just like in the political realm, the extraordinary reveals the true essence of the ordinary.
Yeah.
In science, the extreme scenarios, putting materials under extreme stress, looking at the micro scale, the macro scale, tells you a lot more about the world we live in.
The experiment always looks for the extreme case. The extreme case is not the outlier, it's the definer. The essence is the extreme.
I see.
And that happens in free speech too, by the way.
Right. In the previous part of our conversation, you described how Machiavelli's emphasis on the individual, on acquisition, inspired the classical liberal tradition, right? Rights and the individual, self-preservation, and also Adam Smith, capitalism and the market economy. Acquisition went from glory in politics to the material world of wealth. In one of the essays that you wrote about Tocqueville and Machiavelli's influence on Tocqueville, you described Tocqueville as wanting the same thing as Machiavelli, to inject a kind of great spirit back into modernity, but believe that it was Machiavelli's very materialism, as it degenerates through liberalism, through capitalism, that is the cause of this kind of bourgeois self-satisfaction and petty-mindedness.
Yes.
If Machiavelli were here today, do you think he, as the founder of modernity, would be proud of the thing that he founded?
He might rethink his principles.
Well, tell me more. That's fascinating.
He might. What Tocqueville suggested also can be found in Rousseau, especially. That what is spiritual is more important than what is material. And that means that what is the intentional truth is more important than the effectual truth, what you intend. What you intend is, to some extent, what you get. So America, we see in Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America, America is a consequence of its spirituality. And Tocqueville there says that the spiritual has more power than the material. That's why we remember the philosophers of spirituality among the ancients. Whereas the materialists exist only in fragments, like Democritus and so on. So as if what humanity clings to is its ideas, and it's what spirited people want is to spiritualize rather than to materialize. Not so much worldly success as intelligent understanding and virtuous promotion.
I see. So you think that Machiavelli as a founder succeeded in a sense by making the effectual truth the dominant form of truth.
Yes.
But failed in the sense that he thought the effectual truth would add a kind of vitality to modernity that it ultimately did not.
Yes, that the effectual truth would be the truth. So the effectual truth still has to be standard by an ineffectual truth, so that you can see what is success. You mustn't be blinded by success. Is it good to have success? So that's not a question which you can answer with the effectual truth,
I see.
because that's
You need a normative. This is what we're talking about when injecting necessity.
Yeah.
You need a normative. You need an ineffectual normative standard.
Is it in fact good to think that necessity is good?
Right. I see.
Yeah.
This is how widespread you think Machiavelli's influence is, which is that even progressivism you read as, in some sense, engendered by Machiavelli, namely his rejection of the classical cycle, and his solution, which is the perpetual republic. What is a perpetual republic in Machiavelli's view?
It's the republic of his principles, comparable to the city of God, which is not not the earthly city, but the city of believers.
Right.
So in Machiavelli, the perpetual republic is the one that lives on in the succession of republics. Each republic or each principality, each state has a limited life. And this limited life arises because of competition, because of the effect of routine. When republics succeed, they get lazy and forget what made them succeed. And this is a natural tendency which can be revived with sensational executions above all. But at some point, fortune will overturn every political arrangement, but it won't overturn the understanding that political attainment requires overturning fortune.
Right.
So the perpetual republic is always Machiavelli's thought, I would say.
Right. Meaning that the princes or the consuls of this republic are the different republics that end up following some kind of Machiavellian political science, even if it's not.
You could say the philosophers of modernity.
Right.
Or who have to deal with modernity.
And what makes this cycle or this fall and rise of new republics not a cycle, but instead something linear and progressive?
Because they'll all come to see in their abstracted, responsible way that Machiavelli was right.
Right.
The philosophers that follow him, as philosophers, can't obey him. As philosophers, they have to rethink what he says. So,
right.
And so that he's not an authority to them. To be philosophers, they have to be equal to him.
Right.
And not his slaves, not his vassals.
Whereas the classical cycle, they are a Platonist. They're an Aristotelian. They are a Stoic. And so the classical cycle, people aren't trying to break away, they're trying to adhere.
Yeah.
Whereas in the modern cycle, or the modern perpetual republic, in the beginning of the discourses, he's very proud that he's introducing new modes and orders, that he's an innovator.
Yeah.
And everyone else imitates his innovation.
Yes.
So they pretend to break away from Machiavelli.
That's right.
But that is the most Machiavellian thing to do.
That is, yeah.
And that is what makes it a perpetual progressive thing, that everyone's trying to, it's like modern art. Everyone's trying to break away. Is that fair?
Yes. To imitate Machiavelli is to be Machiavellian and is not to be Machiavellian.
Right.
Because Machiavelli was not an imitator. So he has to have confidence that he is correct, and that philosophers will see this.
There's also something about the effectual truth, I think, that makes it progressive, in the sense that, for example, technology, or like military technology is the easiest example. Like, if the truth is divine and out there in the realm, it is a stable kind of truth.
Yeah.
But if it's effectual, then today it's nanobots and AI, tomorrow it's humanoid robots. That kind of scientific progress is also what makes it progressive and linear, right?
You could say Machiavelli regarded himself as having been commissioned by philosophers, by Plato and Aristotle, He presents himself as if he were Fabius being commissioned by the Roman Senate. The Senate could stand for classical philosophy and its authority. So if the ancients had seen the situation in which he found himself, in this strange, unknown land, they would have approved what he, under their commission, did to change what their authority was. So that his philosophy can be understood as a commission from philosophy itself, as first presented by the ancients.
Yes.
And then he has his commissioners later on too. But they have the power through commission to innovate or to do what he couldn't have done in his situation. So they are his, but they have full power. Uses this phrase, plena potestas, in the Prince, in what the Pope has full power to innovate.
Right. And Fabius, for our audience, is a general who disobeyed the Senate orders because he found himself in a new kind of military scenario.
Yes.
And so the point you're making is what Plato was to classical antiquity, what Jesus was to, let's say, the medieval and the Christian era, Machiavelli is to our era. Someone who's carrying a torch, who's commissioned, but also commissions. And we are living in the age of Machiavelli, so to speak. That's the claim.
Yeah. That's the age of Antichrist.
Right, I see.
Which is also, you could say, the age of Christ.
Right, because he imitates. Right.
He imitates,
right.
Doesn't he imitate Christ after all? Does he really escape what he imitates?
I see. This is my final question. You clearly love Machiavelli. You've written probably more on him than any other thinker in terms of your books and publications. Explain to us your love of Machiavelli and what you find perhaps not satisfying about him.
I have to say that my love of Machiavelli was inspired by Leo Strauss in his book, Thoughts on Machiavelli. I couldn't speak for long about Machiavelli without mentioning Strauss's name. And I think that is the book for understanding Machiavelli. And having read that made me decide to take up Machiavelli as an occupation. Strauss had a kind of generosity. He saw very quickly and very deeply, but he left things to be seen and said by others. And the thing he left to be said mostly about Machiavelli was the political side, the politics of Machiavelli. In his book, Thoughts on Machiavelli, he discusses mostly morality and religion, and not so much politics. So I saw that I could pick up a commission to explore Machiavelli's politics and to show how Machiavelli's political science inspires ours today.
Perhaps this quote is something about why it's relevant for today's age. Today's progressives could learn a home truth from Machiavelli. Progress needs a frequent reminder of the harsh necessity that progressives want to leave behind. What is that necessity that progressives need a reminder for?
That good needs defense. It doesn't come automatically through self-interest, but through virtue. Machiavelli's virtue makes you think of classical virtue. It keeps you in mind of that. Machiavelli's virtue challenges our complacency in such a way as to lead us back to the real virtue, the classical virtue that Machiavelli rebelled against. You can't understand the one without the other.
I see. So ultimately, it sounds like you reject Machiavelli's virtue in favor of classical virtue, but it was a necessary stepping stone to see why classical virtue was necessary, something like that.
That's why I love Machiavelli and why I spend so much time in him. He's a challenge to our complacency.
Right.
We too easily think we are good, or that we know what is good. And if you look at classical virtue, you see too that it faces necessity, that it knows that it has competition.
I see.
That so it's a way of, the beginning of modernity is the best critique of modernity.
I see. In other words, today we veer too much to the side of goodness, and even though Machiavelli for you veers a bit too much on the necessity side, it's a necessary counterbalance in order for you to go back to classical virtue that has both necessity and goodness in a much better balance than Machiavelli himself. Is that fair? So the thing that Machiavelli rejected or tries to attack, you rescue actually by reading Machiavelli.
Yes, that's my fond hope.
I see. Okay, well, Professor, thank you so much for the time today.
All right. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, then go join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. Now, if you like this interview, go check out my lecture on the genealogy of morality by Nietzsche, whose critique of Christianity mirrors that of Machiavelli. You can find links to that lecture and everything we covered today in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.